Hit subscribe, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments what you think 50 cents is worth, because by the end of this story, you'll realize that in a US prison cafeteria, 50 cents can decide who eats. The fight started over a honey bun. By the time correctional officers stormed the cafeteria floor, two men were already bleeding onto the concrete. Plastic trays skidded across the room. A carton of watered-down milk burst under someone's boot. The smell of reheated beans mixed with sweat and iron. It was 11:42 a.m. inside Red Ridge Federal Correctional Institution, a medium-security prison buried in the flat heat of the American Midwest. Lunch had just begun. Inmate Marcus Hale lay face down near the vending cage, his knuckles split open. Across from him, Darnell Briggs was restrained against a metal table, shouting, "It was mine. I paid for it. I paid." What had he paid for? A honey bun. 50 cents. That's what it cost in the prison commissary cafeteria, the cheapest item available. Cheaper than instant coffee. Cheaper than ramen. 50 cents for 440 calories of sugar, flour, and artificial glaze. But inside Red Ridge, that honey bun wasn't just food. It was currency, leverage, status. And someone had just risked everything for it. Red Ridge wasn't the kind of prison that made headlines. No notorious serial killers. No terrorists. Mostly white-collar offenders, low-level traffickers, fraud convictions. The kind of place designed to fade into the background of the federal system. But its cafeteria was different. Unlike maximum security lockdown units, Red Ridge allowed supervised communal meals. 3 times a day, nearly 300 men filed into a rectangular hall with bolted-down tables and cameras mounted in every corner. And that's where the economy lived. In prison, money isn't paper. It's commissary credit loaded onto inmate accounts. Families deposit funds online. Inmates work maintenance jobs earning between 12 and 40 cents an hour. Every purchase is tracked digitally. Every honey bun leaves a receipt. Which is why Special Agent Laura Benton from the Department of Justice's Internal Oversight Division found something strange when she reviewed the footage. Marcus Hale never bought the honey bun. Darnell Briggs did. So, why did Marcus have it in his hand? Marcus Hale wasn't supposed to be a problem inmate. 36 years old. Former insurance adjuster convicted of embezzlement. 7-year sentence. No history of violence. But over the past 6 months, Hale had filed 8 formal complaints about food quality. Underportioned trays. Expired milk. Undercooked chicken. He claimed inmates were being served meals below federally mandated caloric minimums. His grievances were dismissed as unsubstantiated. Then he stopped filing them. Instead, he started spending. Cafeteria records showed Hale purchasing 2 to 3 supplemental items per day, mostly high-calorie snacks. Honey buns. Peanut butter packets. Instant oatmeal. Cheap, filling food. At 50 cents each, it added up fast. Agent Benton leaned back in her chair as she studied the ledger. Hale's commissary deposits averaged $40 a month, sent by his sister in Ohio. But his purchases exceeded $75 monthly. That meant one thing. Someone else was paying. Prison cafeterias operate on razor-thin budgets. According to federal guidelines, institutions are required to provide roughly 2,600 calories per day per male inmate. But that number can fluctuate based on activity levels, age, and institutional cost-saving measures. In practice, trays are assembled assembly line style. Powdered eggs. Reconstituted mashed potatoes. Beans bulked with starch fillers. Processed meat loaves. The cheapest filler? Soy protein concentrate. It stretches meals. Cuts cost. But it doesn't always satisfy hunger. Several inmates interviewed anonymously described a pattern. By mid-afternoon, their stomachs felt hollow. By lights out, headaches began. So they turned to commissary. And the cheapest survival tool inside that vending cage was the 50-cent honey bun. When Marcus Hale regained consciousness in the infirmary after the fight, he refused to press charges against Briggs. "It was my fault," he said quietly. Agent Benton didn't believe him. Prison fights are rarely about what they seem. A stolen dessert could mean unpaid debt. Unpaid debt could mean protection money. Protection money could mean gang leverage. But Hale wasn't gang-affiliated. So who was backing him? Benton requested expanded financial reports. What she found made her pause. Over the past 4 months, more than 20 inmates had transferred small commissary credits to Hale's account. $2 here, $5 there, always under 10. Small enough to avoid automatic audit flags. Total transferred, $1,842. That's 3,684 honey buns. Why would inmates funnel money to a former insurance adjuster? Unless Hale wasn't buying for himself. The cafeteria camera footage from 3 weeks before the fight revealed something subtle. Hale sat alone, unwrapping a honey bun. Across the table sat 2 younger inmates. Both looked thin. One had dark circles under his eyes. Hale broke the honey bun in half and slid pieces across the table. The next day, he did it again. And again. He wasn't hoarding food. He was redistributing it. Agent Benton dug deeper. Red Ridge had recently changed food suppliers. 6 months ago, the same time Hale's complaints began. The new contract had reduced per-inmate food spending by 18%. On paper, nutritional guidelines were still met. On paper. But internal kitchen logs told a different story. Portion sizes adjusted downward to reduce waste. Protein grams per serving reduced by 12%. Fresh produce shipments cut from 5 days per week to 3. The savings? $312,000 annually. The warden signed off. But no one publicly objected. Except Marcus Hale. The fight in the cafeteria wasn't random. According to witness interviews, Briggs accused Hale of playing hero. Of making other inmates dependent. "You think you're better than us?" Briggs reportedly shouted before swinging. Briggs had recently lost access to commissary funds after a disciplinary infraction. No outside deposits. No work assignment. He was hungry. And Hale had just handed someone else the last honey bun Briggs believed was his. Because unofficially, Hale had begun organizing a rotation, using pooled commissary funds to buy supplemental calories for inmates who couldn't afford them. It wasn't charity. It was survival. Agent Benton stood in the prison kitchen 2 weeks later, watching trays being assembled. Each scoop was measured with a stainless steel ladle. But she noticed something. The ladles weren't standardized. Some held slightly less than others. Minor differences. Insignificant on one tray. Significant across hundreds. She requested historical inventory records. The soy protein concentrate orders had increased 22%. Fresh meat orders had decreased 19%. Calories met the minimum. Barely. And only if every tray was perfectly portioned. They weren't. Back in her office, Benton received a lab report she had quietly commissioned. Random tray samples had been analyzed for caloric value. Results came back 11 to 14% lower than reported. Not catastrophic, but cumulative. Over weeks. Over months. Especially for inmates without commissary access. She closed the folder slowly. Marcus Hale hadn't been exaggerating. He had been calculating. But the most disturbing discovery came from a document labeled Supplemental Purchase Monitoring. It was an internal memo from Food Services Management. It flagged inmates who purchased unusually high quantities of commissary snacks. Reason noted: potential redistribution activity, monitor for influence risk. Marcus Hale's name was highlighted in yellow. Next to it, a handwritten note. Addressed through peer intervention. Peer intervention. In prison language, that doesn't mean counseling. It means letting inmates handle it. Agent Benton stared at the timestamp. The memo was written 3 days before the cafeteria fight. When she requested surveillance from the housing unit corridor the night before the altercation, she noticed something else. Darnell Briggs had been visited in his cell by 2 inmates affiliated with a prison work detail, both connected to kitchen operations. They spoke briefly. No audio. But one of them slid something under Briggs' mattress. The next morning, Briggs confronted Hale. And by lunch, blood was on the cafeteria floor. Agent Benton felt the weight of it settling in. This wasn't just about hunger. It was about control. If inmates relied on Hale instead of the institution, that disrupted hierarchy. It exposed weaknesses. It questioned whether the prison was meeting its own standards. And someone didn't like that. She requested authorization to review the kitchen supervisor's communications. It was approved. What she found chilled her. An email thread between the supervisor and an external food supply consultant discussed maintaining compliance optics while optimizing budget efficiency. One line stood out. As long as caloric totals appear sufficient on paper, redistribution issues will self-correct. Self-correct. Through hunger? Through violence? Or through silencing the one inmate who noticed? 2 days later, Agent Benton received a final piece of evidence. A deleted draft email recovered from the supervisor's work computer. It was addressed to the warden. Subject line: Hale situation. The body read, "If redistribution continues, we may need to escalate beyond observation." Escalate. 3 days after that draft, Hale was beaten over 50 cents. Agent Benton stood outside Red Ridge at sunset, wind whipping dust across the parking lot. Inside, dinner trays were being assembled. Some inmates would eat. Some would still feel hungry. And somewhere in that cafeteria, another 50-cent honey bun would change hands. But when Benton authorized a surprise inventory inspection of the kitchen storage basement, and they opened the locked supply cage in the back corner, what they found changed everything. The basement storage cage wasn't supposed to exist. At least, not according to the official inventory map. When Agent Laura Benton descended the narrow concrete staircase beneath Red Ridge's kitchen, she expected to find bulk dry goods, rice sacks, flour bins, sealed cartons of soy concentrate. Instead, tucked behind a movable shelving rack, she found a second chain-link enclosure secured with a separate padlock. No label. No listing in the procurement manifest. Just a lock that didn't match the rest. The kitchen supervisor, Thomas Greer, stood behind her, jaw tight. "That's overflow," he said quickly. "Old stock." Benton didn't answer. She signaled to the correctional officer beside her. Bolt cutters snapped the lock in a single metallic crack that echoed through the concrete chamber. The door creaked open. Inside were boxes stacked waist-high. Identical brown cartons stamped with the same supplier logo. But these weren't marked with standard distribution codes. Instead, each was labeled with a handwritten tag: Alt Protein Batch B, Extended Shelf Formula, Cafeteria Adjustment Units. Benton pulled one open. Inside were vacuum-sealed bricks of protein blend, darker than the usual soy mixture, thicker, denser. She sliced one open with a utility knife. The smell hit immediately. Chemical. Sharp. Not spoiled, processed. Greer cleared his throat. "Those are supplemental extenders. Emergency stock. Completely compliant." "Compliant with what?" Benton asked calmly. He didn't answer. She checked the packaging label more closely. The ingredient list was longer than standard protein filler. Corn starch. Hydrolyzed vegetable protein. Textured soy. Artificial flavoring. Sodium phosphate. A binding agent she didn't recognize. And then one line that made her pulse spike. Modified satiety stabilizer compound. Satiety stabilizer. Something designed to make you feel full. Even when you weren't. Back upstairs, Benton ordered immediate sample testing. Greer protested. "You're overstepping. That stock is within federal guidelines." "Then you won't mind verification," she replied. Within 48 hours, the lab results came back. The alt protein bricks were technically edible, non-toxic, FDA-approved components. But the satiety compound, while legal in certain processed foods, was rarely used in institutional meals. Its effect? It expanded in the stomach when hydrated, creating temporary fullness, reducing the sensation of hunger. But metabolically, it provided minimal nutritional value beyond base calories. In simple terms, it tricked the body. The shipment records revealed something even worse. The all-protein stock had replaced up to 30% of meat content in standard lunch and dinner trays over the past 5 months. Official nutritional charts still listed original protein values. But actual muscle-building amino acid content had dropped significantly. Inmates weren't just eating less. They were absorbing less. Agent Benton requested medical logs. Patterns began to surface. Increased complaints of fatigue, muscle loss, headaches, irritability. None severe enough individually to trigger emergency intervention. But together, they painted a slow erosion. She cross-referenced inmate body weight records from intake to current status. Among inmates without regular commissary purchases, average body mass had declined 7% over 4 months. Among inmates with supplemental purchases, stable. Marcus Hale's redistribution network had been compensating for a deficit the prison wasn't admitting existed. When Benton confronted Warden Ellis in his office, the man didn't flinch. "We're operating within budgetary constraints," Ellis said, folding his hands neatly on his desk. "No one is starving." "That's not the standard," Benton replied. "The standard is adequate nutrition." Ellis's expression hardened. "Agent, federal prisons house over 150,000 inmates. We manage with taxpayer dollars. Cost efficiency matters, not at the expense of human health." "Show me a body," he said flatly. "Show me someone who died." The words hung heavy, because technically he was right. No one had died. Yet. That night, Marcus Hale was moved to administrative segregation for his safety. Isolation. No cafeteria access. No redistribution. His commissary privileges were temporarily suspended pending investigation into unauthorized influence activity. In other words, they had cut off the honey bun network. Within 3 days, tensions spiked across housing units. Cafeteria arguments increased. Minor scuffles broke out. One inmate fainted during work detail. The satiety compound made you feel full for a few hours. Then the crash came. Hard. Benton requested emergency review from the Bureau of Prisons Nutrition Oversight Committee. But before the review could be scheduled, something happened. The warehouse that supplied Red Ridge caught fire. 2:13 a.m. Electrical fault, according to the preliminary report. By the time firefighters contained it, the alt protein storage pallets were destroyed. Convenient. Too convenient. Insurance investigators noted that the fire suppression system in the specific storage aisle had malfunctioned. Maintenance logs showed it had passed inspection 2 weeks earlier. The same week, Benton requested supplier contracts. When she visited the charred warehouse site, blackened metal beams twisted overhead like skeletal ribs. The air smelled of burnt plastic and wet ash. In the debris, she noticed something unusual. One pallet in the center of the burn zone showed less damage than the surrounding stacks, almost as if accelerant had been focused outward, not inward. A deliberate burn pattern. She photographed everything. Then she received a call from an unknown number. "You're chasing budget smoke," the voice said calmly. "Be careful not to get burned." Click. Back at Red Ridge, the effects of the commissary shutdown became visible. Inmates without outside financial support struggled. Some traded stamps for snacks. Others gambled. One inmate attempted to steal powdered milk packets from the kitchen line. He was caught, sent to segregation. The cafeteria began to feel volatile, quieter, but tighter. Eyes watching trays, counting portions. 50 cents meant survival again. Then came the medical emergency. Inmate Caleb Ortiz collapsed in the recreation yard. 31 years old. Nonviolent drug offense. No prior health conditions. Medical staff reported severe electrolyte imbalance and muscle wasting inconsistent with his intake logs. But his logs showed he had consumed standard daily meals. He had no commissary purchases. No outside deposits. No supplemental calories. Agent Benton stood in the infirmary as Ortiz lay unconscious, for fluid dripping into his arm. She did the math in her head. Satiety compound reduces hunger perception. Lower real protein absorption. Extended caloric deficiency. Over time, the body cannibalizes itself. Ortiz hadn't complained. He hadn't filed grievances. He had simply trusted the tray. The turning point came from an unlikely source. Thomas Greer, the kitchen supervisor, requested a private meeting. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the office door behind him. "I didn't design this," he said quietly. "Who did?" Benton asked. Greer swallowed. "It came from above the warden. Regional procurement. They called it a pilot optimization model. For how long? 6 facilities. Benton felt her stomach drop. This isn't just Red Ridge? He shook his head. They're tracking behavioral metrics, incident reports, medical costs, commissary revenue. Revenue, she repeated. Greer nodded weakly. When baseline meals leave inmates slightly unsatisfied, commissary purchases increase. There it was. The hidden incentive. Reduce real nutritional density. Increase demand for paid supplements. Boost internal profit margins. All technically legal. All morally devastating. Benton requested the behavioral metric reports. At first, the request was denied. Then, mysteriously, approved. The data showed something chilling. Facilities using the alt-protein model reported 9% increase in commissary sales, 4% decrease in large-scale food riots, 12% increase in minor altercations, controlled instability, hungry enough to spend, not desperate enough to revolt. It wasn't about feeding inmates. It was about managing them. When Benton visited Marcus Hale in segregation, he looked thinner. They shut it down, didn't they? He asked quietly. They did. Hale nodded slowly. Then watch the yard this week. Why? Because when you take away the safety valve, pressure builds. He leaned closer to the glass. It was never about honey buns. Benton studied him. It was about showing them we noticed. 3 days later, during evening meal service, the cafeteria erupted. Not a riot. Something worse. Silence. 300 trays remained untouched. Inmates sat, staring. No one ate. No one moved. A coordinated hunger strike. Unplanned. Spontaneous. Viral. Even inmates who had never spoken to Hale refused their trays. The cameras recorded it all. And somewhere in a regional office, executives reviewing behavioral metrics saw their pilot model collapse in real time. But the most disturbing discovery came hours later. As staff collected the untouched trays, Benton ordered random sampling. She compared the protein content to archived pre-contract samples from 7 months earlier. The difference was undeniable. And hidden in the updated supplier documentation was a clause she hadn't noticed before. Adjustable nutrient equivalency permitted under satiety-compliant substitutions. Legal language. Loophole language. Designed to withstand audit. Benton sat alone in her car that night, staring at the facility's perimeter lights. 6 prisons. 6 pilot sites. Thousands of inmates. All quietly part of a cost-efficiency experiment built around 50-cent survival. Her phone buzzed. A confidential email attachment from Greer. Subject line. Phase expansion proposal. She opened it. The proposal outlined nationwide implementation within the next fiscal year. Projected savings, $18.4 million. Projected commissary revenue increase, 11%. Projected behavioral compliance improvement, 6%. And at the bottom of the document, one sentence underlined. Redistribution networks must be disrupted early. Marcus Hale hadn't been targeted for fighting. He'd been targeted for organizing. Agent Benton looked back at the prison walls. Inside, inmates were returning to their cells hungry. But, for the first time, they knew. And when knowledge spreads faster than hunger, control starts to crumble. By sunrise, Red Ridge Federal Correctional Facility wasn't loud. It was still. Too still. 3 housing units had joined the hunger strike overnight. Inmates stood for count. They complied with directives. They returned to their bunks. But they refused the trays. Kitchen staff rolled carts back untouched. Plastic lids clattered into bins like hollow echoes. Agent Laura Benton stood inside the control room, watching surveillance feeds flicker across a wall of monitors. Cafeteria tables sat empty except for abandoned meals, protein bricks sliced neatly in half, as if dissected in protest. This wasn't chaos. It was discipline. And discipline scared administrators far more than riots ever could. By mid-morning, regional headquarters was on site. Deputy Director Alan Cross arrived in a dark SUV convoy, his expression carved from policy and liability concerns. He shook hands with Warden Ellis, then demanded a briefing. In the conference room, Benton laid out the data. Nutritional reduction metrics. Commissary revenue increases. Behavioral modeling projections. The phase expansion proposal. Cross listened without interrupting, fingers laced together. When she finished, he spoke quietly. Agent Benton, you're suggesting that the Bureau intentionally modified nutritional density to influence purchasing behavior. I'm presenting documented evidence, she replied. Cross nodded slowly. Cost optimization isn't criminal. Exploitation is, she said. Silence filled the room. Meanwhile, inside segregation, Marcus Hale heard the rumors before official confirmation reached him. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments what you think 50 cents is worth.